Ever since I was a little girl, I'd always been told that I had the prettiest green eyes. My mother used to say my eyes were my best feature, and I genuinely believed they were my greatest gift. However, I later realized how wrong I was. As while I didn't know it at the time, the same pretty green eyes I was blessed with would almost cost me my life, and the morbid tale you're about to hear will explain why. I'd just finished college at the time, and had started working towards a career in modeling. Things weren't going great at first, as it was a lot harder to get proper paid gigs than I'd originally thought. It only started to get easier as time went on, and after a while, I began gaining some traction. That was when I was approached by a supermodel agency, and it was there I met my manager, Joshua Howard. Joshua promised to take my modeling career to new heights if I joined his agency, and knowing what a good manager could do for my career, I agreed. Not long after that, I started getting a lot of offers for modeling jobs, and one of those came from a man named Theodore Ridge. Theodore owned a magazine in Milan, Italy, and he told my manager, Josh, that he'd seen my photos and loved my green eyes. He said he wanted to fly me out to Milan to shoot some pictures for his magazine's upcoming spring issue, claiming my eyes made me perfect for the theme. I'd always wanted to visit Italy, so I immediately accepted the job. As Joshua finalized the details, I went home to say goodbye to my mother and my 2-year-old son, Christopher. Leaving them was always the hardest part. I'd had Christopher when I was 18, and even though juggling motherhood with my modeling career wasn't easy, I loved being a young mother. After saying goodbye, I told my mom to take care of my son and promised I'd be back soon. Then I headed straight to the airport and got on my flight to Italy. When I landed in Milan, I didn't have time for sightseeing. Joshua had sent me the studio's location, so I made my way there directly. However, as I stood in front of the studio's door, something felt wrong. I couldn't explain it at first, but I knew it wasn't just nerves. It took me a few minutes to figure it out, but what threw me off was the silence. Modeling studios were always loud with people moving equipment, adjusting lights and shouting instructions, but at this studio, there was nothing but complete silence. I tried to push the feeling aside, telling myself Theodore probably just liked working quietly. I even told myself I was just overthinking things, but as soon as I opened the door, a man in a ski mask grabbed me from behind. It all happened so fast I didn't have time to react. He forced me inside where another man, also in a ski mask, stood waiting, holding an injection. I let out a scream, but the first man clamped a hand over my mouth. I struggled with everything I had, but I felt the needle push into my arm and everything suddenly went dark. I don't know how long I was unconscious, but when I woke up, I couldn't see anything. My body felt heavy, my mouth was gagged, and I couldn't move properly. I thought I'd gone blind until I realized I was trapped in a small compartment, something that seemed to be a large body bag. I felt a zipper above my head and used my fingers to loosen it slightly so I could breathe. I could hear the hum of an engine and feel vibrations all around me. I wasn't just trapped. I was being moved in the trunk of a car. I stayed tied up in that moving vehicle for what felt like hours before the trunk opened and the bag was unzipped. My eyes burned from being in the dark too long, but I eventually managed to take in my surroundings. That's when I first saw the faces of my kidnappers. 2 men, both looking like they were in their mid-30s. One had short dark hair and a stubble beard. The other had longer brown hair and thick eyebrows. They looked somewhat similar and both had the same cold, menacing look in their eyes. I begged for my life as they dragged me across a field towards a farmhouse. Once inside, they chained me up in a room and left me there for hours. I was terrified, but I knew I had to stay calm if I wanted to survive. When they came back, I asked why they had taken me. One of the men smiled and said, "Our buyers don't like it when the merchandise is loud, so I'd advise you to keep your mouth shut if you want to stay breathing." That word, merchandise, sent shivers down my spine as the man told me why they'd taken me, saying, "We're Black Death, a criminal organization that operates on the deep web. We've been watching you for months. Numerous clients fell in love with your green eyes, and they all want you." He then showed me a picture of myself unconscious in a velvet bodysuit, with the words, "Black Death" printed on a logo placed on my stomach. He showed me photos of other women too, all chained up like me. He then told me what would happen to me, saying, "In a few days, you'll be auctioned off as a sex slave on the dark web. If you're lucky, when your owner's done with you, he might trade you in for another slave. But if you're not, well, I've heard some of our clients enjoy feeding their merchandise to tigers. They like watching the beast rip apart the bodies of their used goods." I was speechless, and nothing could describe the horror I felt. Then he offered me a chance at freedom, telling me that my family or manager could outbid the current offers from the buyers. The highest bid on the dark web was 250,000 euros, and they'd let me go if someone paid 300,000 euros in ransom within 7 days. No one I knew could get that money, but I still gave them my mother's number, Joshua's number, and a few friends. I also desperately hoped that someone would at least realize I'd been kidnapped and call the police. But no one came. Each day that passed felt like I was waiting to die. My captors taunted me constantly. One of them, Boris, told me a client had offered 270,000 euros. Not to buy me, but to buy my eyes, as he wanted them ripped out and kept in a jar. I cried every night, thinking of my mother and my son. I wanted to die rather than face what was coming. But then, hope came from someone I least expected. A guy named Jacob. He was one of the men who kidnapped me, but he was different. He brought me food, he talked to me, and he told me he didn't choose this life, as the dark web organization Black Death had recruited him as a teenager. He even realized how they made over $15 million selling women on the dark web. I didn't trust him at first, but he told me something that gave me hope, as he said buyers preferred women without children, and they didn't know I had a son. I begged him to tell them I was a mother. He promised he would, saying it was the only way they might call off the auction. So I waited, praying. Then, on the day I was supposed to be sold, the auction was canceled, and I was released. But my freedom came with terms. Jacob told me Black Death had prepared a letter I'd receive after my release. It listed instructions to avoid the police, spread their message in the media, and pay them $50,000 in Bitcoin as a release fee. If I failed, they'd find me and kill me. I agreed, as I just wanted to go home. They then blindfolded me and drove me to the British consulate in Milan. Jacob said he'd walk me in and pretend to be a friend I'd called for help. But the second I stepped inside, the authorities recognized me and arrested Jacob. I felt guilty as I thought I owed him my life. But when the investigation unfolded, I found out the harrowing truth, as Jacob wasn't my savior as I'd believed, but the very mastermind of my kidnapping. Detectives discovered emails between Jacob and his brother Boris, showing that Jacob himself had masterminded my kidnapping. He wasn't a reluctant accomplice. He was the leader. Investigators also found hundreds of photos of me on his laptop, along with the staged Black Death ransom letter. In court, Jacob admitted he'd injected me with ketamine, stuffed me into a bag, and taken me to that farmhouse. He said he'd fallen in love with me and thought that if he made me believe he saved me from my kidnapping, we'd start a relationship. Both Jacob and his brother were sentenced to 16 years in prison. This whole ordeal changed my life forever, and I've spent years in therapy trying to recover. I still think about it every day, and I sometimes wonder about the countless other women who aren't as lucky as I was. The authorities confirmed the real Black Death group is still out there somewhere, selling women like merchandise on the dark web to this very day. The story you just heard is based on the true case of Chloe Eiling, a 20-year-old British model kidnapped in Milan in July 2017. Lured by a fake modeling job, she was abducted by Lucas Herba, who claimed to have ties to the dark web trafficking group known as Black Death. Herba demanded a €300,000 ransom, threatening to auction her online. But after 6 days, Chloe was freed and walked into the British consulate, where Herba was arrested. After his arrest, Lucas initially claimed he and Chloe staged the kidnapping together, but investigators found no proof. Authorities later uncovered disturbing evidence, including photos of Chloe drugged and prepped for auction on the dark web, alongside a chilling ransom letter from the Black Death organization. Lucas Herba was then sentenced to over 16 years in prison, later reduced to 12. His brother Conrad Herba, who also participated in the kidnapping, received a similar sentence. The real Black Death group's involvement remains unclear, and their operations on the dark web continue to evade authorities. I'm pretty sure everyone on the internet has heard and used the popular website called Wikipedia. Known as the largest collection of knowledge ever to be accumulated collaboratively in one place, the website is often stated to be the largest and most read reference work in history. We've all used it for work, school, and even research purposes. As the number of visitors on the website grows each day, so does its popularity. However, what most users of Wikipedia don't know is that the website has a truly disturbing and dark side. While everyone knows about Wikipedia, few people know of the hidden wiki. Located on the dark web, this ghastly website is inaccessible to the average internet user, as to access it, one would need to use the Tor browser. Unlike the free encyclopedia that we all know, Wikipedia's dark brother contains content that'll make your stomach turn. The disturbing links on the website lead to contract killers, illegal chemicals, banned weapons, and uncensored content. Due to all this, my experience with the website is truly horrific, and the story you're about to hear will explain why. I can remember this time of school very well because it was a period we all called the dark web phase. I can't recall how it started, but every student in school was obsessed with the dark web. My classmates would dare each other to go on the dark web, and anyone who didn't do it would be mocked and called a coward. Every new day, a student would come to school with a disturbing story and pictures telling us the horrors they'd seen on the dark web. These stories ranged from watching people get murdered on the notorious Red Rooms to purchasing illegal content from the infamous Silk Road. Basically, everyone was doing it, and the ones who weren't were dared to do the same. It soon became like a sick rite of passage, as using the dark web was the cool thing to do, and it wasn't long before it was my turn. I can still recall the fear in my heart that very day, as I was dared by my friends to visit the dark web. Even in my late teenage years, I didn't do well with morbid and disturbing content, so I wasn't sure if I was going to go through with it. However, I knew if I didn't, I wouldn't be able to face my friends. Looking back on it now, even if I was terrified, the peer pressure to do it was overwhelming. All my friends were dabbling in the dark web, and I told myself that there was no reason why I couldn't do the same. So that day, I gathered up the courage and I downloaded the anonymizing browser called Tor. For those who don't know the Onion routing browser, or Tor as everyone knows it, it is one of the few ways to access the dark web. Unlike the clear web, the dark web is a bit all over the place. It isn't uniform and it can be overwhelming. Google doesn't exist on the dark web, as it has its own bizarre search engines. There are a few popular ones called Not Evil and Torch, as these are what people use to get around the dark web, but using those search engines can be very tricky for new users, especially if you don't know what to search for. However, there was a particular website I had been told to visit by my friends, and this website was called the Hidden Wiki. It's a bit difficult to properly explain what the Hidden Wiki is, as it's not a traditional search engine. But to put it in layman's terms, it's essentially a collection of popular dark web links. Once I had reached the Hidden Wiki website, I was greeted with numerous websites that led to illegal weapons, hard drugs, and snuff content. There were a lot of links to choose from, as I saw most of the major dark web websites like the Cannibal Forum, where real-life cannibals discuss how it feels to eat human flesh and their fresh organs. I even saw a link to the Human Experiments page, a ghastly forum that is considered to be one of the most disturbing websites on the deep web. This was because the people behind the website carried out morbid experiments with living people. There are apparently experimental videos of these people injecting bleach into pregnant women, sterilizing unwilling participants, subjecting infants to radiation exposure, and many other horrifying things I can't bring myself to say. I continued scrolling on the hidden wiki website as I took it all in. And for some unknown reason, I was drawn to a particular link called Steak and Cheese. Often called Rotten.com, this website is known for having a large collection of gruesome, violent, and macabre videos. After I clicked on the link, I was taken to the Steak and Cheese homepage. The content I saw there is enough to make any man throw up everything he'd eaten that day. I'm still disgusted to relay the things I saw, as they were pretty much extreme snuff content. There were numerous videos of children being tortured in chains. Most of them weren't over the age of 8. Another video called The Divine Feast showed live cannibalism as it depicted a man eating butchered human parts. The more I looked through the website, the more horrified I got. And just when I thought it couldn't get any worse, I came across a video called True Eaters. I saw the horrific frames of the people in the video as they happily ripped apart little animals like kittens and rats before shoving the animals' carcasses down their throats. I had only been on the website for a few minutes, but I already wanted to leave. I was getting second thoughts about the whole thing, and I didn't think I could see anymore. But before I could leave, out of the corner of my eye, I saw a link to a video called Miss Necrophilia. From what I could tell, Miss Necrophilia seemed to be a dancer. She had a lot of videos on her page where she would sing songs and dance with what seemed to be plastic mannequins. Looking back on it now, I don't know why I didn't just leave the website at that point. I had already seen more than enough disturbing content, but my curiosity got the better of me as I was drawn to Miss Necrophilia's video. It was the only normal video I had seen on the entire Steak and Cheese website, so I caved in and clicked on the video link to watch the full thing. At the start of the video, the woman who I assumed was Miss Necrophilia just stared into the camera. She had put a lot of black mascara above and below her eyes. I can still recall the look in her eyes as she kept staring into the camera. It's hard to put into words, but her eyes looked completely empty, and it seemed like she had no soul. The video then cut to her living room where she had 4 mannequins that were propped up in chairs behind her. The living room had better lighting, so I was able to see better. But that's when I realized there was something odd about these mannequins. For starters, they looked a bit too lifelike for mannequins, as the hair on the mannequins that resembled a man in his 40s looked a bit too real. I also had similar thoughts for the other 3 mannequins. The first 2 were mannequins of 2 small children, a boy and a girl that looked like they were around the ages of 9 and 10. As Miss Necrophilia carried the mannequins around, I noticed the movements of their fingers, and it looked really off, and I had a gut feeling that was telling me this was wrong. Even with the bizarre way the first 3 mannequins looked, it was the last one that threw me off the most. This particular mannequin resembled a 10-month-old infant. But what bothered me about this one was the fact that it looked like a pale life-size doll. Miss Necrophilia then picked up the bigger male mannequin, and she began to dance with it while singing an oddly jolly tune. I couldn't tell what she was singing as the song was in another language, but as she danced around singing with her mannequin, it felt like there was something I wasn't seeing, and that's when it hit me. The horrific realization finally dawned on me when Miss Necrophilia brought the life-sized doll closer to the camera while dancing, and out of the corner of my eye, I saw it. Thousands of maggots were all over the male mannequin she was dancing with. And that's when my brain finally put it together. They weren't mannequins or life-sized dolls. These were corpses. They were all stiff and embalmed in something, which is why I mistook them for mannequins at first. If she hadn't brought them closer to the camera, I would have never realized that they were starting to rot. I opened my mouth to scream, but nothing came out. My mind struggled to comprehend the gruesome atrocity that it had just seen, and I was frozen in shock. I tried to find an explanation as to why a woman would be dancing with rotting corpses in her own living room, but I couldn't. Things took an even more morbid turn when I noticed the picture in the background. It was a family picture that showed a pregnant Miss Necrophilia, her husband, and her 2 children, and they all had a striking resemblance to the corpses. My stomach couldn't take it anymore as I felt the bile in my stomach rush towards my throat. Even after throwing up my lunch, I still couldn't move as I was transfixed to the screen, and I couldn't move my hands to stop the video. Looking back on it now, I don't know how long I stayed transfixed to the screen. It could have been 15 minutes or more, but after some time, a dialogue box popped up on my screen, and it took me out of the horrific trance. The odd chat box came from an anonymous chat room on the dark web, and the message read, "You've been watching this video for a really long time, buddy. I'm guessing you enjoy Miss Necrophilia's content. I'm also a huge fan of hers. You know she takes requests, and I'm sure Allison will make the perfect candidate as the next dancing corpse. After all, she takes ballet classes." My heart dropped to my stomach once I saw the name Allison, and I let out a guttural scream. I told myself that it couldn't be, but I didn't believe in coincidences. Allison was the name of my 12-year-old little sister. I had no idea how the person on the other side of that message knew that. What disturbed me even more was the fact that she had ballet classes after school, and they were held every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. I looked at the date again, and the 16th of April 2010 fell on a Friday. With adrenaline and fear rushing through my body, I got my phone and dialed the police. I was talking so fast that I was basically incoherent. Even after my call, the police thought it was a prank call, so I immediately called my mom and asked where my sister was. She told me school was over and she'd just dropped her off at ballet classes. I then urged her to call the ballet school and confirm Allison was still with them. But when she called, the school told her Allison was nowhere to be found. All the color drained from my face as I thought the worst. I tried to explain everything, but I couldn't find the words. I knew this wasn't something I could properly explain on the phone, so I rushed to my mom's office. It was pretty close to our home, so I was able to get there in less than 8 minutes. I arrived there panting and out of breath, and I took a few seconds to calm down before telling my mom everything. When I was done, my mom walked up to me and slapped me across the face. She'd never hit me before in my life, and I knew exactly why she did it. I had single-handedly put my little sister's life in danger, and it was all because of a stupid dare. I could see the tears and fear in her eyes as she dialed 911. When the line went through, she calmly told them everything that happened. We were then told to wait at least 24 to 48 hours before declaring her missing, but my mother pleaded with the officers to do something now as she felt time was of the essence. My mother's longtime friend, Officer Daniel Barnes, was a deputy on the force, and he was able to convince them to start a search. In an hour, officers littered the streets with pictures of my little sister in hand, asking if anyone had seen her. After I told the officers everything, I also joined in the search for my little sister, and with every passing hour, the beating of my heart grew faster. We searched for 13 hours straight as we covered the entire town, but we didn't find anything. My mother, who had completely broken down into tears, couldn't look me in the eyes. I didn't blame her as I was the only one to blame. As the tensions kept rising to greater heights, I started to think the worst as I pictured Allison brutally killed by psychopaths, and I wondered whether I would see her in Miss Necrophilia's next video. Both the officers and the rest of the search party were visibly tired now. They already started slowing down, and people wanted to go home and continue tomorrow. But right before the search was about to be stopped, we received word that she'd been lying on a bench at the edge of town. We drove as fast as we could till we reached the location, and my mother cried tears of joy as she held Allison in her arms. She was examined by the paramedics, and they said she'd been chloroformed, but she was fine. When she regained consciousness, we asked what happened, and she told us she was taken from her ballet class a few minutes after our mother had dropped her off. She said she couldn't remember much after he grabbed her as the world was fuzzy, but the one thing she didn't forget was the only thing he told her. When I asked what he said, my little sister looked me dead in the eye and said, "Tell Donatello I said hello." This entire ordeal put the whole town on red alert. Our family had to move in with my mom's sister as the authorities monitored our home to make sure it was safe. I was questioned again, and I told the officers everything. I also assured them that I used an anonymous browser, but they told me that didn't matter with the kind of people on the dark web, as accessing my IP address or my computer's webcam and history is easy with the pedigree of hackers that roam around the dark web. The detectives believed this was how they were able to get such privileged and personal information in a matter of seconds. The authorities made numerous attempts to track the unidentified man who had taken my sister. But just like everything else on the dark web, he was untraceable. And no matter how much they tried, it was like he had vanished into thin air. They also tried to locate Miss Necrophilia, but that proved impossible too, as her videos had been scrubbed off the Steak and Cheese website. As the investigation came to a close and I went back to school, I'd heard the entire dark web phase had died down as both teachers and the authorities were actively warning students against using or visiting the dark web. It took a while for our family to get over that incident. My mom said she had forgiven me, but I could never forgive myself for what I put my family through. So please, to all who are listening, take my story as a warning to stay far away from the dark web because, while it might seem fun to you at first, I know full well that a simple link from the dark web can scar you for life. The story you just heard was based on an anonymous report from the town of Franklin, Tennessee, to the FBD, Franklin Police Department, on the 16th of April, 2010. The FPD deputy at the time had received a frantic call from an unknown caller that afternoon, and the caller was apparently screaming about how he'd seen a strange woman dancing with corpses on the dark web. The caller then told the deputy that he believed he and his family were going to be killed by the woman in the video because she wanted to dance with their corpses next. But before the deputy could have said or done anything, the line was cut. Numerous attempts were made to contact the panicked caller, but he never picked up his phone. The Franklin authorities then tried to trace the call, but that proved fruitless as it was hard to pinpoint the caller's exact location. With no way to track down the caller, the detectives tried to find the unidentified woman who was dancing with the corpses and uploading the videos on the dark web. While they were able to find records of dark web users who had witnessed and watched these morbid videos on the dark web, they weren't able to find the woman or the original videos as they had all been scrubbed. With absolutely no leads, the case was never officially opened or pursued. As the years passed by, the case went cold and it was eventually forgotten over time. But to this very day, no one knows what happened to the frantic caller or the bizarre woman the detectives named the Macabre Dancer, who's still out there somewhere filming herself dancing with corpses and uploading these disturbing videos onto the dark web.
You never know what you'll find on the dark web. Sometimes you come across a forum selling drugs or weapons. Sometimes you stumble across a red room. And sometimes you get to know about bizarre challenges people are doing in order to get money. As a cop dealing with cybercrimes, it's my job to keep all such activities in check. Today I'm going to tell you about a case I recently solved and how it's dangerous to participate in anything hosted or organized through the dark web, especially if you don't know anything about this world. Let me start by telling you a story. In the early 1900s, there was a wealthy farmer who owned quite a lot of land in the state of Ohio. Every time his wife gave birth to a kid, he would build a new barn and name it after the newborn baby. He already had 6 children and 6 barns when his wife was delivering the 7th child. Both the baby and mother died during childbirth. Losing his kid and his wife was a terrible shock to the farmer. As days passed, the farmer started to go crazy. One night he was so broken by the grief that he decided that living was too much. He took each one of his 6 kids to the barns named after them, murdered them with an axe, and buried their bodies in the same spot. When he finally reached the 7th barn, he was so broken that he hung himself from the rafter. Eventually, all the 6 barns were sold and torn down, but the 7th barn was never purchased by anyone. People who went there at night reported seeing the dead farmer hanging from the rafters and hearing the crying of an infant. Years passed and the story of the 7 barns became a legend. People from all over the country who were enthusiastic about such legends tried to find all the barns, but no one could ever find the exact location of them. This all went on in the late 80s, when a school teacher who lived in Ohio did extensive research and found old documents and revealed the location of all 6 barns. In reality, none of the barns were destroyed. They were just divided and owned by different individuals. When the teacher and his son went to visit all 6 barns, they could easily recognize them as they still had the nameplates of all the 6 kids at the entrances. The 7th barn, however, was the tricky one to find. It was never used, nor was it named. But all the barns were close by, and knowing that information, the teacher found the 7th barn too. He and his son visited the barn at night. The next afternoon, the teacher's wife reported him and her son missing. When the cops investigated, they found the duo hanging in the barn, dead. This revealed the location of the barn to the public, and their mysterious death added a layer of intrigue to the whole story. Since that day, whoever went to the barn at night never returned. This brings us to the present, and you may ask how this story relates to the dark web. Well, keep watching, as the story is about to get much darker. A couple of years ago, a game appeared on the dark web. It was a website, and it offered a challenge. If an individual or perhaps a group of people visited the seventh barn and spent the night there, the next morning all the people involved in the challenge would get $1 million each. But if anything happened throughout the night, the website wasn't responsible. Many people had tried the challenge since it was announced, and none of them returned. It was as if they had disappeared from the face of the earth. Not even their dead bodies were found. They say that the spirits of the dead farmer, the teacher, and his son haunt the place, and whoever goes to this barn at night gets killed by them. John was a teenage boy who had briefly learned what the dark web was in his class, and despite his teacher warning the class against the dangerous things there, he went home and began surfing on the dark web. Surprisingly, the Tor browser wasn't hard to download, and he was on the dark web in no time. That's when he stumbled across the challenge of the seventh barn. Unfortunately, John lived in Ohio too, and pretty close to the location of the seventh barn. He already had his own car, so all he had to do was sign up on the website, letting the host know that he was taking the challenge. So he signed some NDAs and drove to the location with an overnight backpack. John's parents were used to him spending the night at his friends', so they didn't mind when he walked out with a small backpack and drove away. The next evening, when he didn't come home, his parents got worried and called his friends. They knew nothing about John. They called some of their relatives, and when nothing came of it, they decided to approach the cops as he had been missing for more than a day. The cops had no leads at first, but when they brought in his laptop for investigation to me, I found the dark web's browser installed on it. Suddenly, a shiver ran down my spine at the thought of a 17-year-old using the dark web. I started doing the investigation as fast as I could, as I had a gut feeling that John had gotten himself in deep trouble. It didn't take me long to find out what he had done. The lad hadn't used any sort of software to protect himself from the dark web, and that only told me how naive he was. I told the cops that he was most probably in a particular barn in the north, 7 miles away from here. The cops immediately dispatched some men toward the barn. On the way there, about 3 miles into the journey, they saw something that compelled them to stop. They were driving on a country road, meaning there were only fields around them for acres. One of the cops got out of the car and moved towards the thing they had spotted. The moment he got close enough to confirm, he let his partner and the other cops know. An hour later, I was standing with the other cops in the lobby of the hospital. Everyone is worried, and John's parents are crying hysterically. A doctor steps out and lets us know that John isn't going to make it. He's in his last moments, and his parents have very little time to say goodbye. The whole lobby was filled with cops, relatives, and friends, and we all went silent. His parents rushed inside the ICU, and I was just numb to know what had happened to that boy in a single night. Suddenly, a high-pitched cry brought me back to where I was. John was no more. He had passed away. There was a reason no one was able to complete the challenge of the seventh barn. Every time a contestant went into the barn at night to complete the challenge, the gang that organized the challenge would already be there. Under the blanket of darkness, these people used to sedate the contestant by overpowering him or her. Then they used to cut out the contestant's organs to sell on the dark web. Once the victim was dead, They used to sew back the dead body and burn it. That's why no one had ever returned. And God knows if the ghost of the farmer, teacher, and his son are out there or not. But I'm sure these monsters lurking in the shadows of the barn are much scarier. The cops driving towards the barn had found John at the side of the road. He was bleeding profoundly, and it was a miracle he had managed to walk 4 miles in such a state. By the time they got him to the hospital, it was too late. The gang had already taken his kidneys and one of his eyes, bruised his liver pretty bad, and even injured his ribs. All the internal and external bleeding, along with the missing organs, had led to John's death. If only he had stayed away from the dark web. To all the viewers watching this, please stay away from the dark web, unless you know how to use it the right way. It's a highly dangerous place, and it isn't safe for just anyone to use.
The internet is a strange and sprawling world, a labyrinth of information and activity that seems endless. Most people stick to the bright, polished surfaces where everything appears clean and orderly. But beneath that facade lies a hidden network, a dark underbelly known as the deep web. I had heard of it many times, stories whispered about its forbidden corners. For reasons I still can't fully explain, I couldn't resist the pull to explore it. It started as an experiment, a curiosity-driven dive into the unknown. I used the Tor browser, as every guide suggested, taking precautions to conceal my identity. At first it felt like poking around in an abandoned house. Forgotten forums, black market listings, and files that no one was meant to see filled the hidden directories. The further I went, the stranger things became. I stumbled onto a site, no name, just a random string of characters for the URL. It promised live-streamed events, something called a red room. My pulse quickened as I hesitated. Part of me screamed to close the browser and delete everything. But another part of me, the reckless, curious part, clicked. The room opened to a live feed. At first, it was just a blank, dimly lit space. Then a young man was dragged into the frame, his face contorted in terror. He begged, pleaded with the unseen figures, promising he'd done nothing wrong. A poll appeared on the screen, asking the viewers whether he should live or die. My stomach turned. I clicked to spare him, hoping others would do the same. They didn't. The masked figure stepped forward and ended the young man's life with cold efficiency. The camera zoomed in on his final moments, and then the feed cut to black. My hands trembled as I closed the browser, vowing never to return. But curiosity is a dangerous thing. Despite the horror, I felt an urge to understand more, to see just how deep this rabbit hole went. A few nights later, I tried again. But as soon as I accessed another forum, my computer shut down. When it restarted, all my files were gone. The desktop held a single text file. Stop. Last warning. My heart pounded. It felt like a bad dream, a warning that I was in over my head. I should have stopped. I should have listened. But something compelled me to keep going. I reinstalled the system and entered the deep web once more. This time, I barely had time to click a link before my computer froze, then restarted. There was no message this time, just an eerie silence. About 20 minutes later, my doorbell rang. I froze. It was almost midnight. Peeking through the peephole, I saw no one. When I opened the door, a plain envelope lay on the ground. Inside was a single piece of paper with a simple message. We warned you. Attached to it was a photo of me sitting at my desk, taken through my webcam. My stomach dropped. They knew who I was. I locked every window and door in my apartment, double-checking each one. Sleep didn't come easy that night. The next day, I considered calling the police but dismissed the idea. What could I even tell them? That I went snooping in places I shouldn't have and now someone was watching me? A week passed. I told myself it was over, that whoever had sent the messages was done with me. But one evening, as I sat at my desk, I felt it. A presence. Turning slowly, I saw him. A man stood in the doorway to my bedroom, wearing dark clothes and a mask that obscured his face. My breath caught in my throat. I bolted for the kitchen and grabbed the largest knife I could find. Before I could turn around, he was on me. He slammed my head into the counter with brutal force, and the world went dark. When I came to, everything was different. I wasn't in my apartment anymore. The room was sterile, clinical, with harsh fluorescent lights. My hands were tied, and a camera loomed in the corner. I recognized the setup immediately. This was a red room. Panic surged through me as the masked man entered, flanked by others who remained in the shadows. He approached me with deliberate steps, holding a set of tools that made my blood run cold. He didn't say a word, but I knew what was coming. The next hour was a blur of pain and terror. He methodically broke me, stripping away any hope of resistance. The audience voted on my fate, just as they had with the young man I watched before. They didn't vote for death. That would have been too merciful. Instead, they wanted me to live, but broken. With precision, the masked figure took each of my fingers. The pain was indescribable, but the humiliation was worse. This wasn't just about punishment. It was about making sure I could never use a keyboard again. When it was over, they untied me and left me there, sobbing and bleeding. Hours passed before someone dumped me in a field on the outskirts of town. I was found by a passerby and taken to a hospital. The doctors did what they could, but there was no fixing what had been done. The police questioned me, but I said nothing. What could I tell them? That I'd been targeted by a shadowy group from the darkest corners of the internet? They never believed me. I moved to a new city, changed my name, and cut ties with everyone I knew. But the paranoia never left. Every time I see a stranger glance my way, I wonder if they're watching me. Every time I hear a knock at the door, my heart races. They let me go, but they didn't let me forget. I live every day knowing they're out there, and they're always watching. I'll never touch a computer again. The internet, once a source of endless fascination, has become a symbol of everything I fear. They took my hands, my sense of safety, and my peace of mind. And they left me with one unshakable truth. Some doors should never be open.
I never cared much about online security. I used the same password everywhere, clicked on suspicious links, and shared way too much personal information on my social media. It never felt like a problem until the first email arrived. The subject line was my full name, in all caps. Inside there was a single sentence, "We know everything," attached with screenshots, private conversations, bank statements, medical records, even old emails I had deleted years ago. At first, I thought it was some kind of scam. I ignored it. But then, my phone rang. A blocked number, a voice distorted by software. Send 5,000 in Bitcoin within 24 hours, or your mother finds out where you've been hiding. I didn't pay. Why would I? I assumed they were bluffing. But the next day, my mother called me in tears. Someone had sent her an email with detailed accusations. Things that weren't even true, but so carefully crafted they sounded real. She begged me to explain. I couldn't. I had no idea what was happening. I told her it was a mistake, but the damage was done. My relationship with her changed that day. She couldn't say it, but I could tell she didn't trust me anymore. Then, another email arrived, a video. It was footage of me sitting in my apartment staring at my phone. The The timestamp was from last night. Someone had been watching me. My chest tightened. My fingers felt numb as I gripped my phone. I looked around the room, suddenly aware of every shadow, every open door. I tried to tell myself it was fake, some elaborate trick, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone. This was just the beginning. I locked all my doors and windows. I covered my webcam. I changed my passwords. None of it mattered. The next message proved that. Nice try. Check your front door. My heart pounded as I walked to the door. There was a package inside. A USB drive. I plugged it into an old laptop, afraid of what it might do to my main one. A video played. It was me again, this time sleeping. The camera angle suggested it was filmed from the inside of my room. My stomach twisted. I looked around, my skin crawling from the feeling of being watched. How long had they been inside? Were they still here? I ripped my bedroom apart, searching for a hidden camera. Nothing. Another message arrived. You're wasting your time. We're inside already. I felt like I was going to be sick. I backed against the wall, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. I considered calling the police. But what would I tell them? That someone had sent me a creepy email? That I felt like I was being watched? They wouldn't believe me. Another message came through. 10,000 by midnight, or we'll show her everything, I said in silence, staring at my screen. Then another message. Or you can pay in a different way. They gave me a choice. Pay them, or follow their instructions. Grab a knife. I didn't move. My hands were shaking. We're watching. If you don't do it, your mother pays the price. I walked to the kitchen like a puppet, my body moving without my permission. I picked up a knife, staring at my reflection in the steel. My breathing was shallow, my pulse hammering in my ears. I wanted to run, to throw my phone away and disappear, but I knew that wouldn't save me. Good. Now cut yourself. Not too deep. Just enough to show us you're serious. I pressed the tip of the blade against my palm. I hesitated. My skin prickled with cold sweat. I told myself not to do it, that it was all a game, that they couldn't actually reach me. But then I thought about my mother, about what they could do to her. Do it, or she suffers. I pressed harder. A thin line of red appeared. The pain barely registered. That's a good start. Now let's move on to something more interesting. Every night they sent me new instructions. Small things at first. Breaking a window. Stealing from a store. It escalated fast. They made me follow strangers. Take photos of their homes. Their children. I was becoming a part of something terrible. And I couldn't stop. Then came the worst order. Choke her while she sleeps. Make it quick. If you don't, we are all going to torture her for days. She is going to beg to be dead. I stared at the screen for a long time. My mother, the woman who raised me, who loved me, who doubted me because of them. They wanted me to kill her. I didn't respond. I packed the bag and drove to her house. My hands felt numb on the wheel. My heart pounded in my ears. I didn't remember unlocking the door, but suddenly, I was inside, standing over her bed. She was breathing softly, peacefully, unaware. I moved towards the bathroom, filled the sink with cold water. My reflection looked like a ghost. I grabbed the bedsheet, soaked it, wrung it out. My hands were shaking so badly, I almost dropped it. I walked back to her, raised the wet towel over her face, lowered it. Her breathing hitched, her body tensed. She struggled, but I pressed harder. I wasn't myself. I was something else. And then, I let go. She gasped, sucking in air. I stumbled back, horrified by what I had done, what I had almost done. My phone buzzed. You disappointed us. I ran. I didn't take anything with me. Just drove as far as I could. The messages didn't stop. Why are you running? We are going to find you after we end your mother. I changed numbers. They got the new one. I stopped using the internet. They still reached me. They didn't need my devices. They had my life. Then, one day, silence. No emails, no calls, no threats. I didn't trust it. Every noise outside made my skin crawl. I expected them to appear at any moment, to drag me into something even worse. But nothing happened. Just the waiting. Maybe they moved on. Maybe I wasn't fun anymore. Maybe they had already ruined me enough. I don't use my real name anymore. I live in a small town where no one knows me. I don't have a phone. I don't have a computer. I don't talk to my mother. I don't talk to anyone. I'm afraid. I'm afraid that they killed my mother. I don't even want to know. As far as she knows. If she's alive. The last time she saw me, I was trying to kill her. What else is left for me?